Welcome to the Uncolored channel. I'm Kevin Metcalf. Thanks for tuning in. What I'm going to do today is something a little bit different. I've been going over Dr. Rasmussen's book, Dr. Joshua Rasmussen's book, How Reason Can Lead to God, because I like to cover really big ideas. And the goal is to show you how I think the best people who deal with these kinds of things operate, how they discover ideas, how they develop ideas, how they present them, and how they also deal with challenges to their ideas. And I think that's something that you're going to have to do if you want to have an accurate model of reality. But, you know, like Dr. Rasmussen says in one of his videos, I think I showed it a couple of times ago, where not everybody's looking for that. Some people really aren't looking to understand the truth. What they're really looking to do is have a model of reality, have a worldview that looks like other people's worldview that they want to be associated with. Dr. Rasmussen refers to it as being part of a tribe. And I've heard that a lot of people refer to that like that, part of your tribal mentality. There's this group of people, I want to be associated with them, so I'm going to take on their beliefs. Whether or not they accurately map the way the world is, I really don't care. Because the comfort in my identity and my security is being part of this group. And if my ideas change, then I get booted out of the group. Well, unfortunately, I think a lot of bad ideas go under that model. People who are just believing things because the people around them, the people that they want to be associated with, have those same ideas. And then when they're confronted with ideas that I think more accurately model the truth, they have ways of dealing with that that, again, are characteristic of people who hold bad ideas, in my estimation. So the whole thing I like to do here is just see if I can illustrate that for you by giving you people who have great ideas, and then by going to illustrate to you by people who have what I think are poor ideas, and how they illustrate them, because I think they have the same characteristics. Bad ideas have certain characteristics. Good ideas have certain characteristics. People who present good ideas present them in a characteristic way that good ideas have. And people who have bad ideas present them characteristically like people who have bad ideas. And I think they're very distinct. One of the things about good ideas is that they're simple, not very complex. There's really not a lot to it. That doesn't mean that they could be complicated, you know, like mathematical theorems and things like that. But even people who are in math and science and those kinds of things, when they talk about a really great idea, they talk about its beauty. And I think they're referencing the simplicity of the idea. Because I think good ideas are simple. That's a characteristic of them. One, they illuminate, or secondly, they also illuminate things. So if you come across a great idea, there are other things that you maybe didn't quite know that well. All of a sudden, it sheds light on those things, like turning the light on in a room. So it makes more things easier to understand if it's a really good idea. And thirdly, it just works. Wherever you apply the idea, it does what it's supposed to do. And I think bad ideas have the opposite characteristics. They're very complicated, very complex. And usually that's because the original idea isn't a very good one. And so there's always added layers of complexity trying to fix the previous bad layers of complexity. And secondly, it doesn't illuminate. It actually confounds. Because the more layers of complexity you add, the more questions pop up that don't pop up if you go with the idea that challenges it opposite, or usually its opposite idea, or another idea. And finally, they just don't work. They don't do what they're intended to do. And you can almost look at a good idea and a bad idea like cars. If you've got a good car, you get in it, you turn the key, it starts, goes wherever you want it to go. That's a good idea. Bad ideas tend to be like lemons, meaning you're constantly trying to fix it, you're constantly repairing it, you're pouring money into it just to get it to run properly, and it never quite runs the way it's supposed to. And that's the way bad ideas are. They never do the thing that they're supposed to do. But unfortunately, because there are certain people who, for whatever reason, have these bad ideas, and the bad ideas are part of their identity, they'll never let go of them. That's why things like socialism continues to pop up. After all the, century of dead bodies, starvation, ruined countries, there are people who go, socialism is really the way to go. but it cannot be because it's a great economic system. As a matter of fact, economists will tell you that any socialist knows nothing about economics, and if they did, they wouldn't be socialists. Socialism has nothing to do with running an economy. I think, at least as I've heard many socialists present the idea, they say it's a more moral way. Again, it's a more subjective reason. It makes them feel like they're more moral or better or more good than the person who doesn't accept it. Whether or not it works, not even an issue. And that's why it's a bad idea. That's something we'll get into down the road. But what I've picked for the bad idea today, unfortunately, is an idea that is heard in theological circles, although I don't think it's a theological idea. But I want to be careful because, listen, there's a lot of folks who have this idea who are wonderful people. So I want to make sure that whenever I'm talking about ideas, I'm not talking about the people who hold them. I got friends who, they're down, they're not as big, they don't like capitalism as much as I do. My dad is quite liberal and I'm quite conservative, and I love my father. So I'm not saying that people who hold different ideas than me are worse people than me, aren't good folks. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm simply critiquing the idea, and that's it. I'm going to give reasons why I think it's a bad idea. And if that, is not necessarily what people want to hear, then, I can't do anything about that. I have to be honest. I don't have to be honest, but if I'm going to do this, I want to be honest. And sometimes, you say things that people don't like when you're being honest, and a lot of people don't like you to be honest with them. And obviously this isn't for you. Maybe, I don't know, whatever. So let's go on with this topic. First of all, before I get into it, what I want to do is tell you what I'm not going to do. Okay. One of the things when I'm talking about Calvinism, this is the things I'm not going to do. There's going to be no exegesis. Okay. I'm not an exegeter. I'm not even sure what that means. Okay. The exegeting, the hermeneutics, the breaking down the Greek and the Hebrew, none of that's going to happen here because I'm not qualified. Okay. That's the first reason. I'm not qualified to do it. And there's millions of people, I shouldn't say millions. There are many, many qualified people out there. If you need Bible verses exegeted, hermeneutically, whatever you do to them, or if you need the Greek broke down, there's all kinds of people who can do it out there. Mike Winger's fantastic at it. Dr. Leighton Flowers is amazing at it. James White not only knows the Greek, he loves to let you know he knows the Greek. So there's all kinds of fascinating, wonderful people out there who understand this way better than I do from those perspectives. So I'm not even going into that. I'm also not going to get into the Bible verses is because as I've looked into this topic for the last probably 10 months, and this is not the first time I heard about it. When I became a Christian back I was 18 years old. Just a couple of years afterwards, I'm going to church on my own for the first time. I'd always gone as a kid. You got to. Parents from the South, Louisiana, you got to go to church. But I'm going on my own. And this is like 30 years ago. I encountered this idea of Calvinism. And when I first heard it, I was talking to a guy and we're sitting in the aisle after church, back when I went to church. And he goes, this is, Calvinism, that God determines who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. And it's already been determined. And my first response was, well, that doesn't make sense. Not with what I'm reading so far. And I'm only a couple of years into it. And at that point, I just dismissed it. I just figured, I don't know. People believe all kinds of stuff. This doesn't make sense, not just on the surface. So I never thought about it. Well, again, just recently, in the past 10 months or so, James White, of all people, led me to this topic because I was watching his debates with a guy named Trent Horn, who's a Catholic apologist. And James White, again, brilliant guy, incredible debater. He's got some kind of eidetic memory. Brilliant guy. And so when he started propping up Calvinism, I thought, well, listen, maybe I missed something because this guy's smart. And then there was people like R.C. Sproul, and who was huge back in the day when in the 80s when I was a Christian. He was, one of the biggest guys out there. Turns out he was promoting Calvinism. And then just recently, I found out that Voddie Beaucham is a Calvinist, apparently. And So I thought maybe I missed something. Maybe, because they're all brilliant guys, all wonderful men, clearly love God and trying to do the right thing. So I'm thinking, well, maybe I am missing something, especially listen, if Voddie's down for it, it's got to be something to it. And so I began digging into it. I got some, I got a couple of books on it. I got Lawrence Vance. That's a good book. Lawrence Vance, The Other Side of Calvinism. There's another book by David Hunt called What Love Is This? And now they're critics of Calvinism. But James White's got a book, The Potter's Freedom. I guess what I'm saying is there's no dearth of information on this topic, I found out. I mean, this is a huge topic. And so as I began to look at, what Calvinists were writing and what people who oppose Calvinism were writing, not only did it not start to make sense, Calvinism, and I'm just being honest, it started to make less sense than it did at the beginning. The more I dug into it, the more contradictions seemed to pop out. And not only were the contradictions not answered, or at least not adequately answered, many of the biggest contradictions, the Pipers, the MacArthurs, the Sprouls are like, we don't know. Calvin himself, he's like, I don't know how this works, but we're just going with it anyway. I know this idea directly conflicts with this idea, but we're just going with it. And I always find that problematic. And even the explanations that were given for Calvinism were just insufficient. And this is just me. I see a lot of straw manning. I see a lot of just distracting to different things. I learned tons of new terminology that I never even knew existed. That's only particular to Calvinism. So it's very hard for me to understand Calvinism as a theological idea. And I'm just being straight with you. This seems like some kind of an ideology that was made up that is using Christianity as a cover. And there's a lot of those. Now, that's not to say that, I don't know anything about anybody's salvation. You never ask me about who's saved and who's not. Never will tell you because I don't know. So that's not what I'm saying. I'm just simply saying that I cannot reconcile the very fundamental ideas of Calvinism with what I read in the Bible. That's the bottom line for me. And again, I'm not a Greek guy, not a philosopher, not a theologian. I'm just some dude reading it in my bedroom here. And I think that, and I could be wrong, but I'm going on the premise that God makes the Bible accessible to people even like me. You don't have to be a theologian. You don't have to be a philosopher to understand what God wants you to know. And that's the premise that I'm operating on. So you're not going to be, there won't be any exegesis. There's not going to be any the breaking down of the Greek. If you want to hear Bible wars, you can go to all kind of other channels. Kevin Thompson, listen, you want to have somebody break down the Bible? Kevin Thompson on Beyond the Fundamentals. He's got a channel where he's got charts and maps and all kinds of stuff. I don't know anybody who breaks down the stuff as well as he can do it. That's where you should go if you need that kind of thing. None of that's going to happen here. So what am I going to do? Well, let me cover one thing. Let me cover one more thing. There's another reason why I'm not going to go to the Bible. And this is why, I get the impression that that's not even the problem. What I'm going to illustrate in this video is one of the things that emerged to me as I began looking at this topic is oftentimes Calvinists will read the Bible. It will say something that, in my opinion, just seems to totally refute Calvinism. And they'll act like it didn't happen. They'll just move on to something else. They sometimes may address it. They'll sometimes just pass it by and just move on as if it didn't happen. And so it seems to me from all of the Bible verses, and there seems to be a lot of them that say Calvinism really isn't the way it's working. And when Calvinists regard these, they ignore it. They'll have some sort of a seemingly fabricated terminology that they've come up to get around it. They've got a couple of wills. I've heard there's 3 or 4 kinds of different grace. Not just God's grace. They've got it broken down into 3 or 4 kinds of different grace. There's a lot of parsing of words. You know, is it all without distinction or all without exception? Those kinds of things that prior to Calvinism, I never even considered. I mean, and I didn't consider it because I thought, wow, I don't understand this properly. I didn't consider it because it made clear sense, the Bible I'm talking about, without any of that stuff. And it seems like all of this terminology doesn't make the Bible clearer. It seems to confound it. At least it does for me. So another reason why I'm not going to go through Bible verses, at least as, you know, to try and challenge these ideas, because I don't think that's what the Calvinists is even worried about. They've already heard them. They probably know them better than I do. And they've already dismissed them, which is another problem. I shouldn't say problem. This is something, again, that emerged to me with Calvinism. As I looked into it, I get the distinct impression that the Bible just isn't good enough for the Calvinist. It doesn't quite say the things that the Calvinist wants it to say, right? Because I know the Bible talks about depravity, but that's not good enough for the Calvinist. They need total depravity, which the Bible never talks about, right? Election, clearly the Bible talks about. I think there was 4 occasions of the word. And again, as I understand it, it never means what Calvinists mean by election. That's just when I read it, when I'm studying it. But election wasn't good enough. Unconditional election had to come up, because the Bible just doesn't seem to be good enough for the Calvinists. It doesn't seem to say exactly what the Calvinist wants it to say. So they add all these terminology. There's not just God's grace, it's irresistible grace, right? There's efficacious grace. I've heard people say there's extra grace. Like if somebody gets 20% more grace. It's all of this stuff. And I never heard it anywhere. I'm talking about in Christianity, outside of Calvinism. As I started in the past 10 months, I started studying these things. And so I think the Bible is sometimes an obstacle for Calvinists. And so I'm not even going to get into that. Again, there are Kevin Thompson, Dr. Leighton Flowers does a brilliant job. There's so many people out there, Dave Hunt, Lawrence Vance, all those folks have done all the history of everybody involved in it. Dr. Ken Wilson has a fantastic book that deals with everything about Augustine from the literature. It's at the top of the academic ladder. You know, was Oxford published, peer reviewed. So I'm just saying, I'm not getting into it. 1, I'm not qualified, and there are way more qualified people there out to do it. And 2, I don't even think that's the problem with Calvinism. I mean, it's the problem with Calvinism, but the Bible isn't going to convince Calvinists that this ideology is bad, because they've already figured a way around the Bible. That's how it seems to me. And again, I'm not trying to piss anybody off. I'm just giving you my impression after looking at it for 10 months. Okay. So that's not what I'm going to be doing. So what am I going to be doing as I'm looking at Calvinism? I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to be looking at it from a logical perspective. Now, again, I'm not Mr. Spock. And I'm not talking about, you know, deep philosophy. I just think practically, common sense logic, in my opinion, just destroys Calvinism. And I'm going to go on that level because I think there are a lot of people there. One of the things that I did, and why I thought this is the best way for me to approach it, was obviously because, again, I'm not qualified to do it any other way. But the reason I thought this would be effective was because I hear a lot of people, like there's these call-in shows. And you have people like me who are sitting in the pews listening to these folks talk this stuff. And so they'll do a call-in show, and one that we'll look at later on, if I can find it again. There's a bunch of stuff I haven't found. I lost. I should have been taking notes. But she calls into this show. If you go to Dr. Leighton Flowers' program, that's where I got it from. That's where I stole all this stuff from. And just so you know, I'm a subscriber to Soteriology 101, so I'm not necessarily stealing it all, although still might be breaking rules. I'm just simply saying it's a great program, it's a great show, it's a great channel, and it's a great resource if you really want to understand this stuff. Because Dr. Flowers, I know I'm going on a tangent, but I think it's important to say. Dr. Flowers represents the opponent, the Calvinist that he opposes, I think, as well as anybody could possibly do it. If you want to know how to challenge an idea or represent your idea against challenges, nobody does it better than Dr. Flowers. He's honest, he's straightforward, and he's equitable with other people's viewpoints. He plays them for himself. You can read them for themselves. He does not create straw men. And that's what I think is so great about his channel. But anyway, back to what I was talking about. So a woman calls and she's got this conundrum. She's praying for the soul of her kids, the salvation of her two grandchildren. And she realizes, well, Calvinist says, well, either they're saved or they're not. And she's like, well, then what am I praying for? That's what she asked the pastor, who's a Calvinist. And hopefully I can find it in play again. But the Calvinist first dances around with a lot of the piety that Calvinists answer this question with. But the basic answer they give you is, I don't know. I don't know. And you shouldn't think about it. Just move on to something else. That was his answer, basically speaking. I mean, he tried to kind of bounce her around a little bit. But she finally said, that's not the answer. She goes, I'm not having it. Because she had locked on to the logic and the logical inconsistency of the Calvinist system, and the idea that God says is that you need to pray for the lost. And he goes, and she goes, I'm not having it. That's not how that works. But the pastor was like, well, nobody can understand it, and just pray about it and move on to the next thing, which unfortunately, and this is just me, I hear that far too often from the Calvinists, especially the pastors. I don't know. I know it's a contradiction, and just move on. And so that's what I'm going to be looking at, because in my opinion, logic and reason is prior to the Bible. Now, for some people, that might be a controversial statement. I don't think it is. I think logic is prior to the Bible, just like reading and understand language is prior to the Bible. If you can't read, you couldn't understand the Bible. And if you can't look at the Bible in a framework of logic and reason, then it can literally say whatever you want it to say. And that makes it useless, in my opinion. If you can't understand the Bible in a context of logic and reason, then you've just rendered it useless, because now anything I tell you, you'd have to believe. You could go, well, Kev, you're telling me this, but the Bible says this, and I'll just go, it's an antimony. It's a mystery. And I think that's how a lot of cults get started. And I'm not saying Calvinism is a cult, although I'm not saying it isn't. I don't know what it is. But I just see ideas that are there that I just can't find it in the Bible. And I can also find most of the Bible going, that's not how it is. So what I'm going to be doing is comparing the Bible and looking at Calvinism in a frame of logic. And let me give you the reason why I'm doing this. There's a guy who wrote this book. His name is Stuart Hackett. And Stuart Hackett is a philosopher that I got onto because of William Lane Craig. Here's his book, The Resurrection of Theism. It says something like a prolegomena. I don't know. I think it means prologue. That's a smart guy's way of saying prologue. To Christian apology. And Dr. Craig was given one of his talks, and he was telling a story about how, I think it was like during one of his school breaks, as he was, going to, I don't know, Oxford or something like that. I don't know. But he says during one of the breaks, maybe a summer break, he was going to the bookstore, and this book was at it was on the sale rack. And so he picked it up, and this was a book that I think had something to do with him getting into apologetics. Because at this time, apparently, apologetics or arguments for the existence of God was kind of a theological thing and not something in mainstream academia until this guy Hackett, and people like Hackett probably, wrote books like this that kind of established theological arguments as mainstream academics. So Dr. Craig got into it, and I figured, well, listen, if this can get Dr. Craig on his way, it's something that I ought to pick up. Now, that being said, there's a lot I don't understand in the book, so, bake that in. But here's something that I came across. This is right here. I got ketchup stains or something like that. I think it made me cough or something as I was reading it. But here's what it says. And this is why I'm going the way I'm going when I'm talking about not just Calvinism, but any bad idea. It says here, oh boy, how many get this? Okay. If a statement about the real world is self-contradictory, it is false. That's how the statement starts out. I think that's true. That's how it seems to me. And this not merely in the sense that the statement is internally absurd, but also in the sense that it is a false account of the real world itself. So it seems to me what he's saying is if you've got something that can't be reconciled logically, then you've got something that probably isn't part of the real world. That's what he's saying. And I don't see any reason to disagree with that. Of course, I'm not a philosopher. He goes on to say, if we were to assert that a self-contradiction is true, then we're rejecting the principle upon which the possibility of any assertion at all rests. The principle, namely, that a thing cannot both be and not be at the same time and in the same manner. And if this principle is false, no knowledge is possible, not even the knowledge that a self-contradiction is true. I think he eloquently made my point. If you're going to say that this is true, and this is true, and you know that this cancels this out, this can't be true if this is true, and you're going to go, well, I'm going to take both of them on anyway into my worldview. You've just now, in my opinion, went outside of reality. You just went down the rabbit hole. There's nothing, in my opinion, that could be logically inconsistent and true. And again, once you let one logical inconsistency in, it seems to me, then how can you refute anything at that point? And I think that's what Dr. Hackett is getting at. Once you say something can be both true and not true by its negation, then how can you know anything about anything? You would literally have to believe anything anyone told you about anything, or at least have to consider the possibility that it's true. Why? There's no boundary of reality anymore. And so for me, and this is how I'm approaching it, and maybe I'm wrong, you can let me know. I'm approaching this as if logic is going to be the boundary of what's possible and what isn't possible. I look at it this way. If you're playing basketball or watching a basketball game, okay, you could be watching the greatest player ever, but if they get the ball and they step on the line, play's dead. That's what logic and reason is. It's the out of bounds of reality. And if you're talking with somebody, if you're reading somebody's book or somebody makes an assertion and you go, well, if that's true, then this can't be true. And I know that that's true. So you're out of bounds. Play's dead, in my opinion. Now they can continue to talk, but for me, it's no longer an idea that I can seriously consider as a possibility. Because what they're telling you is, I know this is true and I know this is true. And I know this means this can't be true, but I'm going to accept it anyway. In my opinion, that's not an idea that I can consider seriously. Because if I considered that idea seriously, then I would have to consider seriously Mormonism, any Eastern religion. You could name it. I'd have to think socialism was a great idea, even though it's murdered millions of people over the last 100 centuries. I go, well, socialism has murdered millions of people. How can you say it's a great idea? People are like, it's a good moral thing. And I have to go, well, I guess so. Because logic and reason don't paint the boundaries of what is real and not real. So I agree with Dr. Hackett. I think that logic and reason is prior to the Bible. I think logic and reason is prior to any idea. I think, and again, I could be wrong, no theologian, but I think logic and reason is at least an aspect of God's sovereignty, which is another wild idea that Calvinists have when you say sovereignty. That's like their biggest thing, well, one of their biggest things. And to me, the idea of Calvinist sovereignty is just as twisted can get. But I'm not going to do it here because, again, I've already done this same thing and went like 4 hours. I'm trying to keep it short. So that's how I'm going to be looking at it. I'm going to be looking at it on the basis of, if you're going to say this is true, then whatever you're saying, whatever else is going on, I got to compare it to that. Okay. And here's a system that I use to make these kinds of comparisons. So there's a thing called, well, I shouldn't say, this is what I've been calling it. There's what you call historically reliable data. These are things that over the history of time, in your experience, these things are always the same. Always happens, never changes. Now, doesn't mean it's infallible, but it's when you see this, that's what it means. All the time. That's historically reliable data. So in my past job, and if you know a cop, they'll tell you the same thing. You're sitting in your patrol car, they go, hey, go to this place, deal with this incident, and you have just a bunch of data, okay? Your historically reliable data will be things like a broken window. That always means usually the same thing, right? Fingerprints usually always means the same thing, right? Two people arguing or fighting with each other usually means that they're not enjoying each other's company, okay? That's historically reliable data, okay? Then you have historically unreliable data. Okay, these are things that sometimes are true, sometimes are not true, and you really never can tell initially. This is mostly what people tell you. Okay, what people tell you, generally speaking, historically unreliable. Okay, and it's not because they're lying to you, although oftentimes that's what it is. They're hiding the truth from you. They don't want to know the truth from you. They're trying to just, they're trying to move you on to some other idea, and they're just not telling you the truth. But sometimes they misremember things, right? Sometimes their vision was obscured, or their view of whatever happened was obscured, and they didn't quite see it as it actually happened. So they're not necessarily lying to you, but there's some spots in what they saw, some missing information. Sometimes it's because they're ideologically possessed, meaning that they've given their identity over to some idea. That's a very bad idea. And the only answers they can give you are the answers from this very bad idea, which means they're unreliable and they don't work. So it's not like they're lying to you. They're coming from the only pool of ideas that they have. And it's an idea, or it's answers from this really, really bad idea. So it's not that they're lying to you. That's all the answers they have, because they just don't want to let go of that idea. And these are people who are modeling their view of reality, their worldview, not after what is objectively true, but they want to be connected to people that they like, some group that makes them feel good, part of their identity. And those are the only answers they can give you. But it's historically unreliable data, in my opinion. So what do you do? Well, I think the best thing to do is, or at least what I think, again, if you talk to most cops, what they'll tell you is, you take your reliable data and you measure the historically unreliable data against the reliable data. And that historically unreliable data that concords with your reliable data is probably good data. And that data that doesn't resonate with the historically reliable data, probably not good data. And you probably should throw it out and not consider it as something that accurately maps the event that you're trying to recreate. Just throw it out. Probably not good. Now, it's not infallible, but that's usually the best way to approach it, unless you have some overwhelming reason that says, even though it doesn't conform to this, it is true. And what that usually means is you need more information. Your historically reliable data is just insufficient, and you need more data. And if you collect enough data, then this thing will somehow fit. Okay. And I'll give you a couple of examples of how that works. So if you're in the detective bureau and you get a case and you're going to the scene and collecting all this data, collecting the prints, collecting the evidence, photographs, all that stuff, doing all your interviews, eventually you're going to come back with this package. And this case of all the information, all your interviews, you're going to give it to the district attorney, and they're going to give you one of two answers. One, they'll say, listen, I'm looking at your data, and sure enough, it supports your conclusion. We're going to go to court. Or what they'll do is this. They'll say, I'm looking at your data, and you know what? It doesn't quite meet to the level of this conclusion you've reached. It's insufficient to support that conclusion. You need to go back and do some more work, or we can't go to trial. It might even be an unsolved case. That's what your cold cases end up being. Just not enough data to reach that conclusion that you think happened. And so it's just inconclusive. Okay. Here's what never happens. You never go to the district attorney and go, this is my conclusion and this is my data. And then when your district attorney looks at the conclusions, he goes, well, I'm looking at your data, but it says that your conclusion is impossible. You're saying that this person's responsible for this incident, but your data says that he was nowhere near the place at that time, and there were reliable witnesses who were saying this. And if you're going to go, yeah, I know that he couldn't have been there at any time, but yes, I still believe he did it, she'd throw you out of the office. That's what would happen. Why? You want to have two things that just don't go together. And that's not a reliable source of that means that it probably didn't happen that way. And that's how I approach not only Calvinism, but any idea. If there's an idea that has irreconcilable contradictions, I got to go, that's just probably not the way things happened. And Calvinism it's fraught with. It's not just at the end. It's not like it starts out as a good idea and then kind of out at the fringes towards the end it gets problem. No, it starts out. It's front loaded with contradiction. And the best of the best will go, we don't know. And then they just move on. I know this is true. I know this is true. I know they both can't be true, but we're going to take it and move on. And for me, that's where I was out 30 years ago. And as I'm looking at it again, there just seems to be no reason to consider this as a good idea, in my estimation. Again, I'm not a theologian, not a philosopher. Anybody out there is smarter than me, which is most people. If you let me know where I'm wrong, I'm willing to reconsider. I mean that. I'm not out here to bash anything. I'm giving you my honest opinion, and I'm giving you my reasons for my conclusions. And if I'm missing anything, you let me know. All right. So let me give you just a couple of examples of the contradictions that are front-loaded into this idea called Calvinism. One of them is, in my opinion, is just a warped view of what predestination is. Okay, if I understand correctly, and again, you should go to Kevin Thompson's YouTube channel. It's called Beyond the Fundamentals. He has a whole thing, a few things, but one of them says predestination, not what you think it is. And one of the things he says is that it only appears in the Bible 3 times, and it never means what the Calvinist says it means. And if you watch the video, listen, and I'm not saying he's right and they're wrong. I'm simply saying there's another explanation. And as I look at Kevin Thompson's explanation, it seems way more reasonable than what the Calvinist says. Why? Because Kevin Thompson's explanation resonates with historically reliable information. Well, what's the historically reliable data? The Bible. Kevin Thompson's explanation resonates with the Bible. I'll have to remember to put a link in there because you really should see it. If you understand predestination the Calvinist way, you should hear another explanation. And again, I'm not telling you who's right. I'm simply saying that Kevin Thompson's example, if I'm a district attorney, I'm filing Kevin Thompson's case. The Calvinist case, I got to throw you out of the office. And this is why. What the Calvinist will tell you about predestination is that God picked a bundle of people before anything. Didn't even create anything yet. But he picked a bundle of people, and they're going to be in heaven with him. There's no way that could change because God decreed it. Okay. The rest of everybody, which if you understand certain people, depending on what you believe, but I think it's going to be the vast majority of people, he created specifically to send them to hell. If what they're saying is true. Now, a lot of Calvinists will back off that and go, no, he does not predestine people to be dead. I don't know how you cannot read it that way. And I know how they try to make you not read it that way. But again, every explanation I've ever heard is not sufficient. Doesn't make the case. If you're just going to believe it, face value, what they say is, if God's creating some people to go to heaven, then the rest has to have created to go to hell. There doesn't seem to be any other reason for it. But another issue. But let's take the Calvinists at their word. Well, if that's the case, then you got a problem, it seems to me. And the first problem that pops up then, when the Bible talks about, for example, the prodigal son, right? Lost and then found. That seems to be a theme in the Bible. Lost souls who were found, right? There's another passage in the New Testament talks about how, heaven rejoices more of the one lost sheep than the 99 that have already been found or in the fold. I'm not sure what it is, but you know the verse I'm talking about. So it seems to me that there's this aspect of the Bible that talks about there are these souls out there that are lost, which would indicate that there's some possibility that they're not going to be found. Otherwise, I don't think they'd be lost if you knew they were going to be found. At least to me, lost necessarily implies the possibility that they will not be found. Okay? But if Calvinism is true, I can't read the Bible that way. As a matter of fact, if the Calvinist version of predestination is true, there's no such thing as lost. Right? Look at it this way. So on Tuesday, you order a package because you need shaving cream. So you go online, order shaving cream from whatever site. When you check out, it says it'll arrive on Thursday, your shaving cream. So you go about your business, and sure enough, 2 days later, Thursday shows up, and there's the package of shaving cream on your doorstep, just like they said it would be. So the question is when was it lost? It was never lost. It was always where it was supposed to be. You just hadn't redeemed it yet. But it was never lost. Well, if the Calvinist version of predestination is true, it seems to me, just as I'm hearing it, if it has been determined before the beginning of time and there's no way it could have not happened, they were never lost. There's no such thing as the lost if the Calvinist predestination is true. And I've never heard how that doesn't work like that. I've heard attempts, and we'll go into them. I'm not going to just, you don't have to take my word for it. We're going to go through some of the things that I've read to answer that question and questions like it. And just in my estimation, it just gets worse. It seems to me. But again, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So the idea of lost is gone. And even if you look at it the other way, you might go, well, they're lost, but they knew it was going to happen, right? God and the angels knew that they were going to be saved, but they celebrate anyway, right? They're kind of lost, or they feel like they're lost, or it's, I don't know, allegorically lost. I don't know what you want to say. These are some of the things that I've heard. But again, if I took my cell phone and I'm walking around at work and I lose it, then I'm stressed. Because I need my cell phone, right? Who can go without their cell phone for very long now? There's a bit of trepidation. There's some tension there that I read in the story of the prodigal son, that I read throughout the Bible when they're talking about the lost. There's this trepidation that they may not be found. But if I took my cell phone and I put it in my desk while I went to the gym, at lunchtime, and then I came back, and it's there, it was never lost. I put it someplace, I went away, I knew I was going to come back, and it's no longer lost. So there's no trepidation, there's no tension, and it doesn't seem like there's any reason for celebration. Why? I knew where it was the whole time. So this Calvinist version of predestination has a lot of problems, and that's just one of them. There's problems with salvation, there's problems with the death of God even going to, being sacrificed at all. These are all problems that have been brought up. Again, I'm not sure what the answer is. I know there have been attempts, but most of what I hear are straw man arguments and people avoiding it. And again, I'm going to give you an example of that. The other problem with that idea of predestination is, again, if there are nobody lost, then as I talked about earlier, the woman who's praying for her grandkids, that's where why do I even pray for the lost? Why would I pray for a lost soul if it's already been determined that they would go to heaven? And the answers, in my opinion, are insufficient. Things like, well, God commands it. Yeah, I know he does, but still, what would it matter if I didn't? Because it's going to happen anyway. It doesn't answer the question. So those are a couple of the unanswerable questions that I've found as I've investigated Calvinism a little bit deeper over the past 10 months. I've heard no sufficient answer. I've heard no answers, and it doesn't like there are any answers coming, which again makes it difficult for me to take this seriously as a good idea. It seems like a bad idea to me. So now I'm going to play for you someone who I think is a fantastic man. Again, this is just like me calling, if I love Steph Curry, right? As a basketball player, kind of an idiot in other ways, but he's a great basketball player. If he was playing in a game that I was rooting for, okay, and again, like I said, if he steps out of bounds, I got to call it. It's not that you don't like Steph Curry. It's not that you don't wish he loses the game suddenly. It has nothing to do with that. It's that the game has rules, and if you violate the rules, you got to stop the play. You can't just continue on like it didn't happen, okay? But I see this happen in Calvinism incessantly, and I'm going to show you one more example of this. This is Voddie Beaucham. And Voddie Beaucham is a fantastic man. He clearly loves God and has done some wonderful things. He's got a book called Fault Lines. Fantastic book. Everybody should read his book. And the reason I'm going on and on about it is because I've got some criticism for Voddie Beaucham, but it's not personal. I love the man. And again, I shouldn't say I love him. I don't even know the guy, but I'm just saying I love what he does. And it seems that what he's about, I love that too. So I'm not hating on him, but I'm going to play you a video and he's going over what I call the song of Calvinism. He's going to tell you how dead people are. And when Calvinists do this, they all do it the same, which again makes me believe that they're people possessed by an idea rather than intelligent people thinking through problems. Because they all say the same thing. They have the same answers. And no matter if it's Piper, well, you name it. They have the dead people song where they go, they're dead, 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 super dead, not even close to alive. And they just kind of go on. Why? Because when the Bible talks about being dead, I don't think Calvinists thinks that the Bible does a good enough job of telling you what it means when it means dead. So they have to, add on to it and jump on it and do all this stuff. And so that's what he's going to start out with. He's going to start talking about what he calls an Arminian view or a non-Calvinist view that uses an example of somebody grabbing onto a life rope, which I've heard before, trying to talk about how people are saved. The genesis of this argument is another I shouldn't say weird idea. It's an idea that I can't seem to get my head around, and that could just be me, that Calvinists have this this interesting need of the percentage of credit that God gets as opposed to what man gets. And they are fixed on this thing. It's not even a little thing. It's a huge thing for the Calvinists that God gets all the credit and you get zero credit. It's credit guy. Again, this is for another time. I don't want to go on this too long, but this is what he's talking about. And he says that in his idea is that the Arminian gives God not enough credit, while the Calvinist idea gives God all of the credit. And he uses these two examples, the Arminian thing that he doesn't work, and then he uses the dead, 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 dead super thing to say that Calvinists do it the right way. And the verse he uses, Paul says that it's wrong, what Voddie's saying, in my opinion. When I heard this, I almost fell out my chair, because he reads the verse that says the example he just gave is bunk. And he kind of blows over it like, we're not even going to think about it. And this is Voddie Beaucham. You're not going to get a more brilliant, more passionate Christian leader. And he does the exact same thing all the Calvinists I've seen do, which is you see a conflict, you see a contradiction, I'm just moving on. Not going to think about it. So here, take a listen, and I'll try not to interrupt too much. So this is...
And so, back in our text then, what does our text say about this new birth? And what are the implications of that for us as believers, as followers of the Lord Jesus Christ? Well, first, we see in those first three verses that it is our fallen nature that brings about the need of the new birth. Verses 1 through 3. And you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind. We were dead men walking. We were dead, not almost dead, not kind of dead, not nearly dead. We were dead. It's interesting that, in trying to illustrate salvation, those on the Pelagian, Arminian, Erasmus side of the equation.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Let me just stop right there. This is another thing that you'll find when you're going into this topic, if you decide to. You don't have to. Calvinists have a very heavy reliance on confessions, synods, and this fight over the church between who's the guy? Augustine and Pelagius. That's their thing. It's a fight 500 years ago that Augustine was mad at Pelagius, and they were going back and forth. And they're still carrying on a fight from 500 years ago. The Calvinists are not done with it yet. And so that was one of the ideas that again, the Bible isn't enough, because you'll rarely hear a Calvinist give a sermon on Calvinism that doesn't refer to Pelagius, Augustine, Calvin, the synods, the Westminster. That's where the Calvinism comes from, in my opinion, not from the Bible. It's all of these other sources, and they are so into our Augustine and the fight with Arminius. It's almost like they're still reliving it. It's crazy.
We'll often use an illustration like this. It is as though a lost man were drowning, and he's going down for the last time. And God, through the gospel, extends a life preserver to the drowning man. And God is there, and he will do 99% of the work. But you just have to reach out. You have to grab a hold, and he'll save you. The problem with that is that it completely ignores what we find in the text. I am not a doctor, and I do not play one on TV. However, I know enough about medicine to know this: dead men don't grab things. Amen, somebody. That illustration doesn't work, because the Bible doesn't say you were almost dead and going down for the last time. The Bible says you were a bloated corpse on the bottom of the ocean floor, dead.
Now, does the Bible say you were a bloated corpse on the ocean floor? Because again, Voddie's criticizing the other analogy as not biblical. Is bloated corpse at the bottom of the ocean biblical? Because I've never read that. I've never read that at all. Now, the other argument that the other analogy that God throws a life raft and you'll have to reach up and grab it, okay? God, listen, when I read the Bible, it does say you've got to do something. It tells you to humble yourself. It tells you to believe. It tells you to ask God to forgive you. It asks you to change your ways. It asks you to repent. So again, as I read the Bible, it clearly says I got to do something. Now, I don't know how Calvinists, what calculus they've done to get the percentage of 99-1. I don't know. But it seems like, again, when I read the Bible, God is clearly asking us to do things. Humble yourself. Turn from sin. Right? Acknowledge God as King. He's constantly asking people, again, who aren't Christians, to do things. And so, again, I'm not sure where this weird idea that The bloated dead corpse at the bottom of the ocean is the picture of the Bible, because again, I don't see that. Because you don't ask bloated dead corpse to do stuff. Again, if this song of Calvinism of the dead person were true, would God ever ask you to do anything? That again, it seems like a blatant contradiction to me. But for the Calvinists, it's no problem at all. But that's not the problem in this particular instance. So he just says that the grabbing the life raft, the life preserver doesn't work because dead people don't grab things. You're a dead, bloated corpse at the bottom of the ocean. Okay, just continue and listen and see what happens.
As dead can be, with nothing in you that could possibly respond. You were dead in your trespasses. You were dead in your sins. And note the nature of this here. You're dead in your trespasses and sins in which you once walked. What are we, zombies? Spiritually speaking, yes. Yes.
So right at the end, again, Voddie singing the song of Calvinism of the dead man. Apparently there's no activity going on, right? Talk to the doctor. The doctor said you can't grab things, but you can walk. What was his answer? Did he try to reconcile it? No, we're just spiritual zombies, right? Zombies now, is zombie anywhere in the Bible? I mean, as long as we're talking about analogies that don't work because you can't find it in the Bible, is bloated corpse at the bottom of the ocean in the Bible? No. Is zombie part of the Bible? No. But for a Calvinist, that's enough to get past the fact that what Paul says is there's a lot of activity. Or some activity. Paul's saying that we walked in our sins. And I don't know that if he's just talking about being ambulatory. It might even mean that we were actually doing stuff in our sins. So whenever I hear the dead, super dead, dippity dead, I just go, I don't know. The Bible doesn't say that. Every time I see death in the Bible, I always think separation. That's how I was always taught it as. You're separated from life. It's not a literal physical thing. For example, there's a term, it's a nautical term called dead in the water. Right? The idea is that you're on some vessel out in the middle of the ocean and you're cut off from the life-giving resources. Maybe there's a boat coming to blow you up, or you've got no locomotion and no food and no water. You're dead in the water. Well, nobody means that you're actually a corpse sitting on the water. It just means that there's nothing that you can do to get yourself to the life-giving resources unless what? Somebody provides you a way to get there. That's it. That's what that means, dead in the water. If a boat doesn't come along to save you, you're dead in the water. What it doesn't mean is that a boat comes along and you're dead. I mean, why would it even stop? If you're on a boat and you're gonna go to sail, there's somebody over there, and you get to that person and he's dead already. You just drive on. But you'd have to be you can't be just bodily dead. You got to be cut off from the life. The life is Jesus. Dead in your sins means you're cut off from Jesus. That's how I've always meant it or understood it. Because here's the other thing. Later on, when you do accept Christ, you become dead to sin. Well, it certainly doesn't mean that you can't sin anymore. At least I'll be the one who admits it. Being dead to sin doesn't mean that you never sin again. So it must be I'm separated from death. So the Calvinist, just the super hyper literal translation of death. Listen, you can sing the song, but you have to start ripping pages out of the Bible where God asks us to do stuff, where God says you need to turn, you need to humble yourself, you need to do these things. If the Calvinist version of death is true, we couldn't do any of those things. So why would God even be asking us to do it? Again, it seems like this is just, again, no theology degree. I'm not even close to what Voddie Beaucham is as a Christian. Not even close. When the Saints go marching in, I'll be way in the back sweeping up after the horses. Okay? I'm no but if I just look at it, what it says, it's hard for me to not see. It seems pretty simple. Dead in your sins means you're separated from God. But God provides a way so that you don't have to always be separated to him. You can now have a relationship with him. And I'm no Bible teacher, so don't go, hey, the guy on YouTube, don't go by what I'm saying. Read it for yourself. And if you don't have the Calvinist ideology, their presuppositions, I don't know. Again, I've never had a problem with any of these verses until I started really digging into Calvinism. And I'm like, wow, if this Calvinism stuff is true, then I got to start ripping out pages out of my Bible. But for me, the Bible is a historically reliable source of information. And guess what? Infallible. So then when somebody comes along with an ideology that says these things in the Bible aren't true, there really aren't any lost people, I got to throw away the ideology. For me, I got to get rid of that. When somebody as wonderful and smart as Voddie comes along and goes, hey, you're dead, super dead, dippity dead, couldn't do anything, and throughout the whole Bible it's telling me to do stuff, I got to take the historically reliable data over this data that says it isn't true. What I don't do is go, well, they're both true, and I'm going to pray about it. Not an option. That gets you tossed out of the DA's office. So that's my introduction to Calvinism. That's what I'm going to be looking at over the next couple of videos that I do. We will go back to Dr. Rasmussen's book because, again, I want to balance the two. But we also will looking at something Dr. Craig's was because, again, there's ways people present information. It's not just the idea itself. There are ways people present ideas that are characteristic of good ideas and ways that people present ideas or defend ideas that are characteristic of bad ideas. And you know when somebody's talking about an idea, the way they're defending it or presenting it, you already know this is a bad idea. You can already tell. So we're going to get into that next time. Get Dr. Rasmussen's book, How Reason Can Lead to God. Is a fantastic book. Also, listen, Voddie Beaucham, he's got this book called Fault Lines. It is a fantastic book. You have Stuart Hackett, The Resurrection of Theism. You'd have to be way smarter than me to read and understand all of it. Also, Dr. Leighton Flowers' channel, Soteriology 101. I'm a subscriber. I love the channel. I'm always there. What is it, a Patreon? I'm a Patreon. Is that what a patron? I don't know. But financially support the channel. It's a great channel. And that'll be it for this time. Do me a favor, subscribe, like, and do all those things. I appreciate it. And again, I'm not coming to you as some authority on anything. I'm the least credible person on any of these topics. I'm just using just common sense and, just my experience. And I could be wrong. But if you can show me what I'm missing, I don't want to misrepresent anybody's idea, and I don't hate anybody who disagrees with me. That's your thing. I could be wrong. But just again, thanks for listening, and I appreciate any feedback that you have, and that's enough of me yammering. All right, get out of here. It's enough out of you guys.